Welcome to the It All Begins with Landowners panel. Thank you for coming and joining us after lunch. I'm David Levy. I'm a partner at the Baird Holm law firm in Omaha and Lincoln. I will be your moderator this afternoon, so you won't hear very much from me, hopefully, if all goes well. I will introduce our panelists first, and then I will get out of the way and let them do their part. We have Sean Harris, who's a Vice President of Development with Ranger Power. Ranger is a solar development company very active in the Midwest and working on a large project here in Lincoln and Lancaster County. We have Mike Zak. I always mispronounce his last name, so I'm gonna take the easy way out. Mike is a longtime good friend of mine, and Mike is a landowner in Holt County in an active wind energy project. Mike also has the distinction of being someone who got together his neighbors and formed a landowner association, and then went out and found a developer and brought a project to Holt County that's been very successful. And then last but certainly not least, the man who needs no introduction, John Hanson with the Nebraska Farmers Union. We learned today that John has given more speeches about wind energy than anybody in Nebraska. So it's an honor to add one more to the count here. So again, thank you all for coming. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean. We got kind of a short session here. I think we've only got 45 minutes, but we're going to try and leave some time for Q&A. So be thinking of those questions as you're listening to the presenters. Thank you.
As David mentioned, I'm Sean Harris, Vice President of Development with Ranger Power. So I have a brief, about 10-minute presentation on the topic of It All Begins with Landowners, with a specific focus on utility-scale solar development. So starting off with just a little bit about our company. So Ranger Power, we're a utility-scale solar development company. We're headquartered in Chicago. Whoop. Uh-oh. We are also the developer for the Salt Creek Solar Project, which is located east of Lincoln within the city limits or within the city's jurisdiction, as well as within Lancaster County's jurisdiction. Salt Creek, I believe it's a 250 megawatt solar and storage project. I believe it was the first utility scale solar project in Nebraska to receive permit approval. I think it was also the largest project to have received permit approval in Nebraska. So our current portfolio is over 30 projects that we're developing throughout the Midwest, over 1,800 megawatts of which we have successfully permitted. And by the end of this year, we will have over 500 megawatts that will be commercially operable and delivering power. And we currently have 3 projects that are currently generating power and online right now. And those projects are located in Michigan and Illinois. So I'm actually going to come back to site selection. I'll just give some context on the development process and what we do as utility scale solar developers. So we've broken it down into 4 different categories here. So starting with interconnection, this is probably the longest lead time component of the development cycle. Typically, from submitting a queue position to entering into a interconnection agreement is about a 3 to 5 year life cycle. And then one of the first things we do in the development, once we determine that we are moving forward with the project, is engage with local landowners. So typically, I'll hit on kind of that process a little bit later, but we will engage with landowners, work on the site control portion of the project, and then once we have a pretty good idea of where the project could be located, we will start to engage with the community. So this is typically in the form of knocking on neighbors' doors, holding open house meetings, sometimes a combination of both, just to provide more information about the project, answer any questions that neighbors to the project may have. And then once we have the land secured, we will engage with stakeholders to the project. So this could be in the form of legislators, the local economic development organizations, folks like that who we think could be supportive of the project and our community stakeholders. And then the next step in the process would be the permitting process. Typically, this will kick off with a lot of the environmental and technical due diligence, so things like wetland delineations, determining where floodplains are, cultural resource surveys, topographical surveys, things like that. And then we use that information to prepare permit applications and also determine where we use that information to also develop a site plan. So determine where we can locate the project, areas that we need to avoid that might have environmental sensitivities that we need to avoid. And then once we have all that information prepared, we will submit a permit application to the local authority having jurisdiction over the project. Sometimes that's a city, a county, not in Nebraska, but in some states we work in, it's a state land use permit approval process. And then from submitting a permit to receiving the permit approval, it's usually about a 1 to 3 month timeline for that process. And then in the background, on the offtake category, in the background, our team is working on marketing the project, engaging utilities, trying to find a long-term partner with a utility to buy the power from the project. So then I'll come back to the site selection slide here. So one of the first things we do is look for a viable location for the project to interconnect. So typically a transmission line or a utility substation, and determine, can that point of interconnection handle the capacity for the project that we're proposing there. And then usually right after that, we will get on the ground, speak with landowners, see if it's something that local folks are interested in participating in, because of course, we need the land to host the project capacity. And then we also look for land that's relatively void of constraints and is mostly buildable. So we're looking for flat land that is void of a lot of wetlands and floodplains or other kinds of environmental sensitivities. It's also important for us to have the project located to in close proximity to large load centers. So in Nebraska, the two largest load centers are Lincoln and Omaha. Our Salt Creek Solar project is, of course, located very close to Lincoln. And then finally, zoning. So we need the community that we're working in to have, for it to be something that the community that we're working in to be interested in hosting. So having the zoning and regulatory framework for approval of the land use for these projects and setting a kind of a roadmap for us on how to develop the project. So the land process, again, this is one of the earliest components of the development cycle. We'll generally identify an area in about a 2 to 3 mile radius of our point of interconnection. We will usually start with reaching out to landowners who are closest to our point of interconnection and also some of the largest landowners in the area. And then from there, we'll reach out to smaller landowners to kind of fill in the holes. And if folks are not interested in participating in the project with panels on their property, but we need to connect 2 other tracts of panels, then we'll approach folks for an easement just to bury a line across their property. So this process is usually can take upwards of 2 years to work with landowners and secure the land needed to host the project. So it's definitely a partnership approach. We understand that this is a very big decision for landowners. Taking land, oftentimes it's farmers, so it's a big decision to change the use of your land and potentially the change a big component of your way of life. So we understand the weight of the decision and understand that because of that, it's a long process to establish the relationship, establish that trust, and make sure that we have an agreement in place that works for all parties. The other thing is there's a lot of ongoing interaction with landowners throughout the development process. So when we're doing environmental work, we're in close communication, letting folks know when people need to be on site. We inevitably will mess up some legal descriptions or something in a lease that needs to be amended. So there's a lot of title curative work that we'll be coming back to landowners for, estoppels when we're closer to financing. And then also the partnership is really important when it comes to permit hearings. I think it's really important when the body that has jurisdiction over the project and is holding public hearings to hear from landowners that are participating in the project and hear from landowners the reasons for participating and why they were interested in including their land for the project. So I think we don't probably. I think probably most folks are familiar with the different real estate structures, so I don't think we need to run through this. But I think one important thing I'd point out on the real estate and agreement side is that it's really important to try to keep things universal. While there are confidentiality clauses and things like that in agreements, so that particular information in agreements are not shared, we understand, we know that a lot of times these are neighbors and friends, and inevitably discussions will happen about their leases or their purchase options. So it's really important to keep things universal and have a universal structure for payment, just so that folks are getting compensated fairly across the board and at a universal rate. So that was all I had. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Mike. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean, and thanks, John, for inviting me to speak today. As David said, my name is Mike Zakrzewski. My wife, Shelley, and I own, operate, and live on the same farm that I grew up on out in northeast Holt County. We're about 3.5 hours northwest of here. Our farm sits in the middle of the Grand Prairie Wind Energy Project, which at the time it was built, it was the largest one in the state. I have no idea if it still is, but it's a big one. It's 400 megawatts of production capacity and 200 individual turbines. I think there are 14 turbines, some on our property, a lot of them on our neighbor's property surrounding us, but 14 turbines less than 1 mile from our front door. So we're right in the mix of things out there. This month marks 5 years of operation for Grand Prairie, so it's been up and running for a while. I spoke here 2 years ago and focused on the benefits that our county and our communities and we as individuals have been receiving for bringing a wind project into our area. So I really don't want to just repeat the same stuff today. I think that's archived on the website if you want to see it. But I will summarize by saying it was 2008 when they started working on pre-development of the project. And as I said, we now have 5 years of operations under our belt. And I can tell you folks that everything that was promised by this project has come to fruition. Our county is seeing very real and very significant property tax relief. Our communities have seen very real and very significant job creation. And my neighbors and I are receiving very real and honestly very significant easement payments for hosting these turbines on our properties. So I'm very happy to say 5 years in, everything is running exactly the way it's supposed to and exactly the way it was promised to us. I guess just want to talk farmer to farmer or landowner to landowner to you today. I am not an industry shill by any stretch. I won't make a dime whether you decide to participate in a renewables project or not. I just want you folks to have accurate information so you can make intelligent choices. I know that there is still a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. That's unfortunate. Most all of that has been disproven time and time again. I think, honestly, it's time to move past all of that. And I will tell you folks that I think, by and large, the rest of the nation has moved past that and has accepted the reality that these projects are needed. They are going to be built, and I think they're going to be built at a fairly accelerated pace in the next decade or two. I know that we in agriculture, we're a tight-knit group. We tend to not trust outsiders so much, skeptical by nature. That's very much how I am. Back in 2008, when our developers approached us, I was very skeptical. I spent most of that first year speaking with anyone and everyone I could find who had credible, reliable information on renewable energy. I spoke with folks in all facets of the industry itself. I visited with state and federal government employees whose jobs were to oversee and regulate these types of projects. And I actually hunted down other farmers and ranchers in other states who already had projects up and running in their backyards and got their firsthand perspective on how it was living with these things. After processing all of that, I decided that these projects did have merit and they were worth pursuing. And here we are a dozen years later, and I think Holt County, my county, absolutely is living proof that these projects are legitimate. They are beneficial to the communities who host them, and just very much they are what they say they are. I don't have a lot. I'll leave time for questions at the end of this, and I'll be around the rest of the afternoon. If you would like to sit and visit with me, I would be happy to. Leave you with one last thought, I guess. If you are still on the fence, you still don't know who to believe or what to believe about all of this, ask yourself, are you going to rely on a group of know-it-alls at the coffee shop or your buddy's cousin on Facebook? Or are you going to listen to guys like me who, we have no agenda. We have absolutely no reason to tell you folks anything but the truth. And in my case, I now have half a decade's worth of real-world firsthand experience living with a renewable energy project. So I guess I thank you for hearing me out. And like I said, I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So I've been working with landowners in my capacity as president of Nebraska Farmers Union for some time. And so when we first started doing, we were doing all these outreach meetings across the state and doing maybe 100 to 120 a year. And so the idea of this whole conference was to take all of these folks that we had met during the course of the year and give them an opportunity to come together and get to know each other and network, and then have all the same, different kinds of folks in the same place at the same time. So they got to mix and mingle and visit and trade questions and stories and relationships and all of that. And so when we started in 2008, we had about 120 landowners would show up to one of these conferences. And that was always the biggest session that we had, was the landowner session. And so the year that I put on the topic was the idea of farmers and landowners and ranchers getting together in order to be able to pool their resources so that they could afford a good lawyer to represent their interests and to not get picked off one at a time, but to work together in a landowner. Was the year that we had several utilities, but also a bunch of private sector developers who said, if you do that, we're going to pull out. And so I had a fairly brief conversation with them, and I said, no, you're not. Because without landowners, you don't have a project. And if landowners want a level playing field, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And in fact, you'll come to find out over time that it's better when landowners understand the process better and they understand all of the mechanics better. And that, you need to just let landowners figure this out, but you're not going to walk away, because if you walk away, then that's going to get out and then you're going to have that to deal with. And I said, so just chill. So they did, but they didn't like it. And so we've come a long ways since then. And so the more education, the more facts, the more information, the more stuff that you do. And I see David Bobber there, and God knows how many meetings we've done together down through the years, where you walk through the particulars of the pluses and the minuses. Every single form of electrical generation has its own particular set of pluses and minuses. And there's not one of them that is all pluses and no minuses. And so you have to measure all of those. But when you look at the renewable energy area, and we're a farm organization, but we're also a farm organization that helped build the modern ethanol industry. we started doing education on ethanol in the mid 40s. And so we did a concentrated effort for like 5 years to build the support to get the ethanol board created in 1971. So these are all value added. And what's value added? That's where you take something you already own or control and you add value to it, because that's an additional benefit to agriculture and rural communities. Because as you know, we buy everything we buy at retail, and we sell everything that we have to sell wholesale. And so anything that we can do to add value, anything that we can do to put more money in the pockets of folks in rural communities, the better. And so, as I said earlier today, when we drove to Cap Dirk's visitation, we drove through Antelope and Boone counties, and it was just one turbine right after another, just rows and rows of turbines in that whole community. And when, I said, each one of those wind turbines is a job in town, a good part-time job. If you can find a job in Petersburg, Nebraska, that you can go into town and you can get paid $15,000 to $20,000 for, that's Miller time, because there's not very many of those. And so here you look at all that additional farm income. Has it made a difference? Well, when I was a kid, because I'm a mile inside the Madison County line on the Madison County side, we felt, intellectually and culturally superior to both Antelope and Boone counties, because compared to those counties, we had good roads. Well, that ain't true anymore. We have to show our kids pictures of what maintainers look like, because we don't see them that often out in our end of the county. And, we don't complain about a lot of stuff. It's just like, well, if the culvert's out and it's bad enough and you drive through it and it's like 12 foot straight down, we complain over stuff like that. But the fact that we don't have gravel, we've kind of given up on that. So, but you go a mile west, and here's the county that we used to make fun of. Their roads are substantially better than ours. And I mean, substantially better. And so is Boone County. And so you look at Boone and Antelope and you go, it's been transformational. There's just no question. So at the end of the day, when you hear, somebody knocking on your door, and it's somebody who's a land agent representing a company, and you're going, oh, well, what is this? It is one household at a time, but for the community, it's one of the largest opportunities that community will ever have in terms of economic development for that community in that county. And so it's a serious business proposal that needs to be taken seriously. And so what are the things that you think about or that you do when you're taking on a new business partner for 20 years that you've never seen before, right? Well, you want to make sure that they're actually straight shooters, that they're honest, that they deliver, that they don't overpromise and underdeliver, and that as somebody who used to sell not only fertilizer but seed corn and Charolais bulls and a lot of other things, it's not a good idea over time to overpromise and underdeliver, because if you have a hybrid in a test plot and you can have 4 hybrids in there and 3 of them are in the top 7 hybrids in the plot, but if one of them is 30 bushels out of the run, they'll remember that one forever. Bad experiences have long memories. And so it's important to build that trust, and you do it over time, and you do it by being open and transparent. And you have to be realistic about the process. And so this is a lot of process stuff. And so if you have not been familiar with this, it is complicated. So trying to help folks understand which part of the process is going on is very helpful at the end of the day, because that helps them put things into context. And so the change from the time that we started to the time that we're at now, and I am also a landowner in a potential wind project myself. And so as you look at this, what is the difference? In the past, if you were a landowner in a wind project and a developer came to your county and you're part of the county and they knocked on your door and they offered you an easement, all you really needed to do for the most part is to sign the agreement after you were comfortable that it was a good one and keep your head down and not say anything, and then just wait for prosperity to run over the top of you. You didn't have to do much. But now with the day and age of social media and misinformation and folks with agendas, when it comes time to go to the planning and zoning meeting, it's more important now than it's ever been that folks who want the benefits of this very substantial economic opportunity, and it's one where you don't have to put up a bunch of money to be an owner or a player, you just have to be good with the agreement, is that it's more important than it's ever been that the beneficiaries of that also have conversations with their neighbors and that they also show up to those planning and zoning hearings. And so now, you have to do some lifting, and now you have to weigh in. And so this is, we're the ethanol industry, to give you an idea, is $5 billion of new capital investment. And so you look at, the jobs, the additional farm income, it is without question one of the biggest, most successful economic development approaches that the state of Nebraska has ever undertaken is ethanol. But right now with wind, we're at $4.6 billion of new capital investment, new tax base, new property tax relief. And whether you're in the project or not, your property taxes are going to be adjusted because of this new extra partner that you have. And so this is, when you look at wind and you look at, and solar is just starting to weigh in. We don't have the numbers yet, but they're going to be very good numbers. And so as you look at this new renewable energy opportunities for ag, it's far and away the best thing that has happened to rural Nebraska at a time when we desperately need more income in our rural communities and we need more job opportunities. And this is, at the end of the day, opportunity knocking. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was pretty good without the slides, huh? No, and thank you, Sean and Mike as well. Question, I'll just say one thing though. I think it was John who said without willing landowners, you don't have a project. And at these planning and zoning meetings, you will hear opponents say things like, oh, this is being forced on us, or this, this developer came here and now we have to do this. And without those willing landowners, those people who have owned that land in those communities and lived and raised their families in those communities for decades upon decades upon decades, that developer does not have a project. And everybody's got property rights. Applicants have property rights. Landowners have property rights. And it's a matter of finding that balance. It's certainly not a science. I don't know if it's an art either. But, again, private renewable energy developers in Nebraska do not have eminent domain authority. So without voluntary, willing landowners, and enough of them to make a project come together, it can't just be one or one over here and one way over here. You have to have enough of them in a relatively contiguous area so that you can build a project of a scale that makes it economically feasible. So in fact, what it really is true is that you need to have a community that is supportive and willing and wants to participate in a big way to have a renewable energy project in a community. And I think what we heard today is evidence of that, no question about that. So with that, questions for our panelists, anybody?
Yeah. What do you think a developer would have to do to be in breach of contract?
Yeah, I can take that. I guess it depends on the contract and what specifically they're in breach of. But I think there's typically notice provisions in lease agreements or purchase options if there is a breach, a process to provide notice of that breach and a cure period in which it needs to be addressed, or else I think there's action that can be taken to, at times even terminate the agreement.
This is a question for Mike. Mike, could you say a little bit about the experience in Holt County with respect to the relationship between the project and county government, and how county government views the wind project in your area?
Sure. Is this on?
Should be.
Okay, sorry. We were very fortunate in that we had very progressive leadership on our county board of supervisors part. They were very receptive from the beginning. They saw immediately the potential benefits, and through their support behind the project, like I said, very early and all the way through the process. As John mentioned, roads are a big part of the budget in a rural county like ours. I can't remember. I think it was like 10,000 loads of aggregate that our developers brought into Holt County to build up existing roads and actually create new roads. And so the county, for the 2.5 years of construction, the county kind of parked their maintainers in our little part of the state of the county and let the developers just maintain the roads as they were building them. They continue to be head and shoulders above anything we saw pre-project as far as condition. Also, the extra revenue for property tax. It's when you divide that slice of the pie more ways. It obviously helps the entire county, and so we were very fortunate in that respect.
Dave Vavra with Lincoln County Wind Association. I've done meetings with John around the state. I've spoken at hearings with David Levy, but there's a new development that's just kind of been popping up to our landowners, and that is they're getting offers and letters from, I'll call J.C. Wentworth, saying, well, it's your money and you want it now. How about you sign a deal with us and we'll pay you a lump sum, and then we'll do that. We'll take the payments over the years. With Nebraska's law, is that allowable? We can't sever the wind rights from the ground. So if I've got a turbine and I sign with ABC company that's going to pay me a lump sum for the 20, 30 years, then I sell the property, well, then that new owner will not get the wind rights, which is by law spelled out.
Maybe I'll give it a try. I'm hoping one of these guys will jump in and save me, but I guess not. It's a good question. I don't know the answer. I've not heard of that situation, but I understand what you're saying. I suspect it would partly depend on how exactly that agreement was written, because you're right. Nebraska law does prohibit severing the wind rights from the other property interests. And so that agreement would have to be written in a way that didn't do that, which may be possible, because at the end of the day, it's really a financial transaction. You think about a mortgage on a house, the lender doesn't take the deed to the property, they take a deed of trust, right? Which is different. They don't have the full suite of property rights that the actual owner of the property has. So there may be a way to structure that works. It's an interesting idea, and you see lots of things where people want to monetize income streams. In a sense, that's what you do when you take out a mortgage on your house as well. So an interesting question. Others? All right, I've got a couple. Mike, would you and Sean and John as well, but Mike, if I'm remembering correctly, you had a landowner association in Holt County.
We had a loose association. It was not a formal association by any stretch.
Would you talk, though, a little bit about that process and kind of how that worked and why it was beneficial, and anything you would do differently a second time around?
There wouldn't be a lot that we would do differently. Obviously, it worked out pretty well for us. The association was important. We decided early on that we didn't want to twist anyone's arms to participate. It was a big decision. It was obviously new to all of us back in 2008, 2009 when we were signing up landowners. We had an initial meeting of everyone in the project area with great attendance. We kind of formed the loose association at that meeting. And as I said, we just presented the project as it was presented to us. Didn't do any arm twisting. Didn't force anyone to decide one way or the other. And we ended up with, I want to say like 93% participation rate in the project area. So it was phenomenal. Maybe that's unusual. I don't know. Maybe we just have a good neighborhood, but it was a fairly smooth process, and everyone seemed to be on the same page from the onset.
Interesting. Thank you. John, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I blame you in part for that, Mike. And you were really a good advocate, and you really did your homework, and you really helped your neighbors know what was going on. And so you also had a good developer. And so from my vantage point, as conditions change out in the field, then you have to recalibrate how it is that you deal with those things. And so the things that I see right now is that it's more important than it's ever been in order to deal with the neighbors who do not have a wind turbine, but do get to look at it. And so it's kind of like whether or not you own the hog facility or the cattle fat yard. If you own it, the manure doesn't really smell as bad. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you have a piece of the economic action, then those wind turbines look better. And so coming up with ways to help deal with neighbors, and the old developers kind of think rule of thumb was that one of your strongest opponents to the project would be a neighbor who wanted a wind turbine and didn't get one, right? So, but that phenomenon's still out there. But I think we got to come up with better coping strategies to deal with those neighbors, and also the communities at large. And so, the community foundation for the school, for the things that are clearly tied to the community. So it's, as my advice to developers is that we have to recognize that is part of the changing environment, and that we need to recalibrate how it is that we are working with communities, and that good news travels a lot slower than bad news, and that it's really important for all of us in wind world or solar world to make sure that the projects that we're working with are successful and do a good job of treating landowners. And while that education process will be slower, at the end of the day, if the facts are on your side, you have the operating advantage. And so that's what I tell people who ask me those questions is go talk to the landowners in an established project and find out what their issues are and what they think about it. And the overwhelming majority of those folks are going to say, this was a good experience for me.
Yeah, and now, Dad, we've worked with groups of landowners who have kind of negotiated collectively, and I think it does streamline the process. It can accelerate the development cycle, just having more site control streamlined and at just an earlier phase of the project life cycle. I think we oftentimes get approached with folks sometimes with 10, 20 acres to locate a project there, and oftentimes if they're not located near existing electrical infrastructure and there doesn't appear to be a lot of other potential for locating a site there, then it's sometimes not worth pursuing. But we have been approached also, in addition to seeking out our own projects that kind of meet the criteria that we look for. We've had folks who have collectively owned 500 or more acres together and approached us, and in an area that we otherwise weren't looking to develop a project. And because of them kind of collectively deciding this is something they want to do and approaching us, we've ended up moving forward on projects in situations like that.
And I'll just say, not to make this the Landowner Association panel, but I think it is an important topic. And I've seen a lot of different types of associations. You see some like Mike's that are kind of a loose association, an informal association of neighbors. working together. And then you see kind of on the other end of the spectrum, very formal associations with complicated formulas about if I'm in the association and I don't have any infrastructure on my property, I still get paid a certain amount based on where my property is, or maybe based on why I didn't or couldn't have that infrastructure on my property. And I think those are, they're very good and interesting opportunities. I think they're certainly not necessary. You see, I think, equally as many projects or more without them than with them, but they are, they're an interesting tool in all of this.
I just remembered something in my just wonderful PowerPoint put together, which is economics are really important, and the financial consequences and obligations and opportunities is really important. But we also have to remember that the social factor really is significant. And so, I use the example of my neighbors to the north, and we've only lived next door to each other for 5 generations. And so, we go to church together, we go to school together, we go to funerals together, we go to weddings together, and there's things that they do that are kind of sometimes drive you nuts. But, in rural communities, how the neighborhood feels about it and kind of the social aspect of it is still a significant part of how the whole deal works, because you do want to try to make nice and you do want to try to avoid open conflict. And so the social factor is, I think, sometimes underestimated, but it is significant.
Yeah, thank you, John. I agree. And it may sound a little cliche, but, transparency, open, honest communication, right? Like anything in life, those things take you a long way. And you see projects where the developer starts with that mantra from the beginning. The community starts with that mantra from the beginning, and they tend to be the most successful that you'll find. So, all right, we're out of time. Please join me in thanking our panelists.